Hey guys, tonight we begin with the year that broke the world. Year 536. A year where you're expected to survive without sunlight for months, watch your crops turn to ash before your eyes, and somehow convince yourself that the gods haven't completely abandoned humanity. A year where everything, and I mean everything, went wrong in ways that make our modern problems look like a group chat argument that got slightly out of hand. Before we settle into this descent into historical darkness, take a moment to get comfortable. Find yourself a place where your body can sink into softness. Let your shoulders drop down, away from your ears. If you have blankets nearby, pull them close. The air around you should feel safe. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Let that air travel down. Fill your lungs. Settle into the deepest parts of you. Hold it there for just a moment. Now exhale slowly through your mouth. Again, breathe. This is where we begin. Dim the lights if you haven't already. The screen you're watching should be barely visible, just bright enough to guide you, but not so bright that it demands your attention. Good. Now, imagine yourself in a time before electric light, before central heating, before the assumption that tomorrow will look a lot like today. Because in 536, that assumption would have gotten you killed. Like and subscribe our channel, and also comment. Pause. Listen, the reason we're exploring this particular year tonight is because it's one of the most fascinating moments in human history where everything, simultaneously and catastrophically, fell apart. We're talking about a year that historians have spent decades trying to understand, a year that ancient writers described in language so urgent, so frightened, that even reading it 2,000 years later makes your skin prickle with unease. And the beautiful, terrible thing about studying year 536 is that it teaches us something profound about human resilience. It teaches us that we survive moments that should have killed us all. Somewhere in the year 536, a man named Magnus Aurelius stood in his villa in Constantinople, the greatest city in the world at that moment, and looked up at the sky. The sky was wrong. It wasn't dark in the way night makes it dark. It was dark in the way that doesn't make sense. It was dark at noon. The sun was there. You could see it, a dim red disk hanging like a wound in the sky. But it wasn't warming anything. It wasn't lighting anything. It was just there, failing to do the one job it had been doing reliably for all of human existence. Magnus probably thought about his grain stores. He probably thought about his children. He probably thought, somewhere deep in his chest, that the world had tilted off its axis and nobody knew how to write again. And he was almost correct. Pause. The historians call this the late antique Little Ice Age. The poets of that era called it the end of times. We'll call it what it was, the year when the sky betrayed humanity and humanity had to figure out whether it was worth surviving. Now, before we walk into the catastrophe itself, you need to understand three people. Not because they're famous, most of them aren't, but because they're real. They lived through what we're about to describe. And their lives show us what that year actually felt like for ordinary people trying to make sense of an extraordinary disaster. There's Marcus, a farmer in North Africa. He's about 45 years old, which means he's lived through wars, plagues, economic collapse, and the usual grinding poverty that came with being a farmer in late antiquity. His hands are permanently stained with soil. He has 2 children still living, which is already a miracle given the infant mortality rates of his time. He's not rich, but he's never starved. Not yet. His wheat has never failed him. His grapevines have never betrayed him. This year will test both of those assumptions. Pause. Then there's Lydia, an artisan's wife in Constantinople. She's 32 years old, and she has spent her entire adult life in the most sophisticated city in the world. Her husband makes luxury items. Fine cloth dyed with purple from murex shells, items that only the wealthy can afford. She has never questioned whether she would eat. She has never wondered whether her children would survive the year. The security of Constantinople's trade networks has been the foundation of her life. And this year, that foundation is about to crack beneath her feet in ways she cannot yet imagine. Pause. Finally, there's Brother Anselm, a monk in a monastery in the Alps. He's 58 years old, and he has spent the last 32 years in devotion to God and to the transcription of sacred texts. His life is structured, predictable, and deeply meaningful in ways that feel unshakable. He knows that the world is full of suffering. That's almost a point of monasticism, to transcend worldly suffering. But his suffering has always felt manageable, spiritual. This year will teach him that physical suffering is not always spiritual. Sometimes it's just suffering. These three people will be our companions as we walk through 536, not because they did anything historically important, but because they were alive and they survived, and in surviving, they tell us something true about what that year meant. Pause. The beautiful, haunting thing about studying history is that we know how this ends. We know that humanity didn't go extinct. We know that Marcus's wheat eventually grew again. We know that Lydia's husband eventually returned to making purple dye cloth. We know that Brother Anselm kept transcribing his texts, kept praying, kept surviving. But when you're living through the moment, when you're actually in the year 536 looking up at the wrong sun, you don't know any of that. You don't know that this will eventually end. You only know that today the sky is wrong, and you have no idea what tomorrow will bring. That's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about surviving a disaster. It's about surviving without knowing that you'll survive. It's about making it through each day without the guarantee that there will be more days coming. Pause. Now, before 536 fully arrives, before we watch the sky darken and the crops fail and the ancient world begin its transformation into something new, we need to understand what came before. Because you can't understand the weight of a disaster unless you understand what was being lost. The year 536 didn't just happen. It arrived into a world that was already unstable, already fractured, already uncertain. And that context is going to matter enormously when we watch how it all fell apart. Imagine yourself living in the early 6th century. Imagine that you've never heard of electricity. You've never heard of fossil fuels. You've never heard of climate science or atmospheric aerosols or volcanic winter. You only know that the sun has always risen. The crops have always grown mostly. And the world is operated according to principles that feel more or less reliable. Yes, bad things happen. Wars happen. Famines happen. But they're temporary disruptions in a fundamentally stable system. In 536, that assumption becomes the most dangerous thing you could possibly believe. Pause. By the middle of the afternoon of that year, in locations scattered across Europe, the Mediterranean, and Asia, people would look up and notice something was wrong. Not catastrophically wrong at first, just off. The light was slightly dimmer than it should be. The temperature was slightly cooler than it should be. If you weren't paying careful attention, you might not notice at all. You might think the clouds were just heavier today. You might think the sun was just following a natural rhythm that you'd never paid close enough attention to understand. But Marcus, standing in his field in North Africa, knew something was wrong. He'd been farming for 30 years. He knew the feeling of the sun on his face in every season. He knew what the light looked like at noon in the middle of summer. This wasn't that. This was thinner. This was weaker. This was the sun doing something it had never done before. Somewhere, perhaps, he turned to his neighbor, a man we'll call Hassan, and said something like, "The light seems different today." And Hassan probably said, "You're getting old, Marcus. You're seeing things. The light is fine." But Marcus would know that Hassan was wrong. He would know it the way you know when someone is lying, even if they don't have any evidence. He would know it in his bones. Pause. That's where we are. That's where the story begins. With that moment of noticing that something is terribly wrong and no one around you believing you. With that deep, inarticulate knowledge that the world has shifted, even though everyone around you is insisting that everything is fine. Take another breath. Feel the rhythm of it. In, hold, out. This is going to be a story about survival. But first, it's a story about the moment when survival became a conscious, frightening choice. The year 536 is about to arrive. It will transform the world. But before it transforms the world, it will transform the people living in it. Marcus will change. Lydia will change. Brother Anselm will change. And in watching them change, in walking through this year alongside them, we begin to understand what it means to survive not just a crisis, but the knowledge that you're surviving something unprecedented, that nobody has tools to face this, that everyone is improvising, that you might fail, but you might not, and that's enough to keep going. Pause. The sun is about to disappear. The sky is about to darken. The crops are about to fail. The ancient world is about to fracture. And it all begins with a single year. This year, 536. So settle deeper. Let your body become heavier. Feel the softness beneath you welcoming your weight. The world we're entering is cold and frightened, and full of people trying to make sense of chaos. But it's also a world of profound resilience. It's a world of people figuring out how to survive, even when survival seemed impossible. We're about to begin that journey. Pause. You wake. It's still dark, but not with the comfortable darkness of night. It's the darkness of early morning, the time when you're not sure if dawn is coming. You've been awake for perhaps an hour already, lying in bed, thinking about the work of the day. This is how it is in 536, in the early months before catastrophe arrives. Time moves slowly in these first hours of consciousness. Marcus lies on a straw mat on the floor of his small house. It's made of packed earth and stone, and it's cold. The coldness is permanent here, baked into the walls from the desert nights. He's been lying still, and his body has gradually surrendered its warmth to the ground beneath him. His wife, whose name is Sophia, still sleeps beside him. She's curled into herself, the way humans do when they're trying to preserve warmth. Even in sleep, her face looks worried. Life in the 6th century doesn't offer much peace, even when you're unconscious. The air smells of old smoke from the fire that died hours ago, and of dust, and of animals. They keep goats in an adjacent room, not because they want to, but because keeping animals close to the house means you can protect them from theft and from predators. The goat smell is thick in the air this morning. It's a smell Marcus doesn't even notice anymore. His body has learned to ignore it the way yours might learn to ignore the smell of your own home. After weeks or months, the thing that seemed overwhelming becomes simply the background of your life. Pause. He sits up slowly. His back makes a sound, a small cracking sound, like dry wood shifting. He's not old, Marcus, but his body is aware of someone who spent his entire day bending and lifting and reaching. The spine doesn't forgive that kind of work. He stretches his arms up above his head, and the muscles in his shoulders scream in a way that he's learned to expect. This is normal. This is what bodies do when they work. Outside, it's still dark, but you can feel it approaching. That moment when the sky will begin its slow transformation from black to deep blue, to lighter blue, to the pale gold of actual daylight. Marcus has learned to sense this moment without looking. His body has become attuned to the rhythm of the sun. It's not magic, exactly, but it's close. It's a product of 30 years of waking before dawn, working to the full heat of the day, resting when the sun finally disappeared. He's lived his entire life according to the sun's schedule. When you're a farmer, you don't have a choice. The sun is your clock, your calendar, your boss. You begin when it's light enough to see. You stop when it's too dark to work safely. Everything else, eating, sleeping, the time you spend with your family, fits into the spaces the sun leaves for you. Sophia wakes as he sits up. She doesn't open her eyes. She just makes a small sound, the way people do when they're coming to consciousness. "It's still early," she says, her voice rough with sleep. She's speaking in a dialect of Latin mixed with local words, the language that everyone speaks here. It's not the refined Latin of the educated people in the cities, but it's functional. It carries meaning. "Yes," Marcus says, "the sun isn't up yet. Will you eat before you go to the fields?" "Perhaps a little. Something small." This is how they speak to each other. In short sentences, practical, without extravagance. They've been married for 23 years. They've moved past the need for elaborate communication. They understand each other through rhythm and habit. Pause. Lydia wakes in Constantinople, and her waking is entirely different. Her bedroom is made of stone and tile, the floor covered with cloth that's fine enough to be almost soft. There are oil lamps on wooden stands, though they're not lit yet. The room is cool and dark, but it's a deliberate darkness. This is a wealthy person's bedroom, designed by someone who understood comfort. She opens her eyes and looks at the ceiling, which is decorated with a geometric pattern that she finds calming. The pattern is intricate, small squares and triangles arranged in a way that suggests movement, without actually moving. She's looked at this ceiling every morning for the last 15 years, and she's never tired of it. Her husband, whose name is Gregorius, sleeps beside her. He's already awake. She realizes, because his breathing has the quality of wakefulness. He's just lying still, thinking his own thoughts. This is another detail of their marriage, that they often wake and lie in the dark together, not speaking, just existing side by side. "Did you sleep?" she asks him. "Some. I was thinking about the purple shipment. It's later than it should be from the east." This is a small worry for them, but it's real. Purple dye is expensive and requires precise timing to harvest. A delay in the shipment could mean missed deadlines for their clients. Their entire income depends on the reliability of these supply chains that stretch across the Mediterranean and beyond. It will arrive, Lydia says, and she believes it. Constantinople's position as a hub of trade has made the city rich and powerful. The idea that the trade networks might fail, might become unreliable, has genuinely never occurred to her. Why would it? Everything always works. Pause. Brother Anselm wakes in his small monastic cell in the Alps, and he wakes not to an alarm or a thought, but to the bell. The monastery bell rings at a specific time every morning, calling the monks to their first prayer. It's a beautiful bell, old and well used, and its tone carries across the mountains in a way that never fails to move him, even after 32 years of hearing it. He doesn't need to open his eyes. He simply sits up in bed and begins the process of dressing. His fingers know where everything is. The habit hangs on a hook beside his bed. His sandals sit on the floor. He performs these movements in a state that's almost meditative, not quite awake, not quite asleep, but in that space between where monks learn to live most of their lives. The cell is cold. The Alps are always cold, and the spring of 536 is particularly cold this year, though Brother Anselm doesn't yet know why. He assumes it's just the normal pattern of mountain weather. Warm, cold, warm again. The cycle that he's witnessed 32 times and expects to witness for many more decades. Pause. The bell continues to ring, and in monasteries across Europe, monks are waking up. In farms across North Africa and the Mediterranean, farmers are rising. In cities across the known world, people are sitting up on their beds or their mats or their straw, preparing to face the day that's approaching. And in the darkness before dawn, that profound darkness that comes just before the sun begins its ascent, none of them know what's coming. None of them know that this will be the year that changes everything. For Marcus, the morning routine continues as it always has. He performs his ablutions from a bucket of water that's been sitting outside since yesterday. It's cold enough to make his breath catch. He washes his face, his hands, his feet. He does this partly for cleanliness and partly because it's expected, a ritual that marks the transition from sleep to wakefulness, from the private world of dreams to the public world of work. He puts on the same clothes he wore yesterday. They're made of rough linen, dyed a color that was once a darker brown, but has faded to a kind of grayish tan. There are small holes in several places, and Sophia will repair them at some point, but right now, they still serve their function. They cover his body. They protect him from the elements. They mark him as a farmer, which is what he is. The goats need to be tended first. They need to be let out into the small pen where they spend their days. They need fresh water. The water in this part of North Africa is something you carefully conserve. Water is precious. You use enough to keep the animals alive, but not more than that. There's a constant calculation running through Marcus's mind about scarcity and survival. How much can I use? How much must I save? How do I make sure that today's consumption doesn't deprive me of tomorrow's necessity? This is the fundamental anxiety of ancient agriculture. You produce food, but not that much food. A single bad year could destroy you. Multiple bad years could destroy your entire community. The margin between survival and starvation is thin. It's thinner than most people who've grown up with grocery stores can fully imagine. Pause. In Constantinople, Lydia performs her morning routine with the ease of someone who's never seriously worried about scarcity. She has slaves to bring her water, already warmed slightly. She washes with soap made from render fat and plant ash. She dresses in fine linen undergarments and in a tunic made of wool that's so finely woven it feels almost silk-like. The colors are rich, purples and deep blues that her husband's profession has made accessible to her in a way they're not accessible to most people. She looks at her face in a small mirror made of polished silver. She's still beautiful, she thinks, though she notes the lines that are forming around her eyes. She's 32. She's had 3 children, though only 2 are still living. The other died when she was 6 years old, of a fever that came this summer and took so many children that year. She's learned to live with that absence, the way people learn to live with all kinds of absences. A slave brings her fruit, figs and dates that were preserved from last year and kept carefully in storage. She eats them with honey drizzled over them. This is breakfast for someone wealthy. Marcus is probably eating bread and onions, or perhaps just bread. The onions aren't abundant this season. The gap between them isn't just a gap in money. It's a gap in everything, in daily safety, in the assumption that tomorrow will bring food. Pause. Brother Anselm has already made his way to the chapel with the other monks. They stand in the darkness. The chapel has windows, but it's still hours before the sun is up, and they sing the first prayer of the day. Their voices are trained and beautiful. Some of these men have spent 40 or 50 years learning to sing the ancient Latin of the liturgy. Their voices carry the weight of centuries of Christian worship. The chapel is cold. The stone holds a cold and doesn't release it. Brother Anselm can feel it seeping up through his sandals, into his feet, working its way up through his body. But he ignores this. The cold is part of the structure of monastic life. It's meant to mortify the flesh, to remind you that your body is temporary and less important than your spiritual growth. He's learned to welcome the cold in the way that long practice teaches you to welcome things. Pause. And so the morning of early 536 arrives. It arrives the way mornings always arrive, with gradual lightening of the sky, with a sense of time moving forward, with the small routines that structure human life. Marcus walks to his fields. Lydia attends to matters of household management. Brother Anselm returns to his cell to copy text from sacred manuscripts. The light, when it finally comes, seems normal. This is before the darkness. This is a world still functioning according to the expectations built into 3,000 years of human experience. The sun rises. It travels across the sky. It provides light and warmth. It sets. No one yet knows that this is the last year this will happen normally. Pause. Marcus reaches his field just as the sun is fully above the horizon. The field is perhaps 5 acres, not large by modern standards, but substantial for an individual farmer, working mostly with his own labor and occasionally with help from his 2 teenage sons when they're available and not needed for other tasks. The crop this year is barley. It's not the most profitable crop, but it's reliable. Or it was reliable. It's been reliable for his entire life. He's planted barley every year since he was old enough to understand what seeds were. His father planted barley. His grandfather planted barley. The rhythm of barley cultivation is in his muscles and his memory. He's brought a hoe with him. It's a simple tool, a wooden handle with a blade made of iron that's been beaten flat and sharp. The handle is smooth from years of use, worn into the exact shape that fits his hands. You could say that the hoe works suspiciously well, this being Marcus's hoe, because he and the hoe become almost the same object. He doesn't think about how to use it. His body simply knows. The weeds have already begun to grow among the barley plants. This isn't surprising. Weeds are aggressive. They want to grow. They grow when given any opportunity, and the opportunity in a field is constant. If you stop maintaining a field for even a few weeks, the weeds will take it over completely. They'll strangle the crop you planted. They'll consume the water and the nutrients that you need for your barley. So the rhythm of early summer is clear. You weed, dip the hoe into the soil, break up the weeds, flip them aside so they die in sun. Repeat for hours, with sweat running down your face and your shoulders beginning to burn, with the constant knowledge that if you don't do this, all the work of planting, the careful selection of seeds, the plowing, the sowing will have been for nothing. Pause. The repetition becomes almost meditative. There's a rhythm to it, the sound of the hoe hitting the earth, the physical motion of bending and lifting and striking, the slow progress across the field, work that your body can do while your mind wanders to other places. Marcus thinks about his son, who's considering moving to the city. He thinks about his wife's request for new cloth. He thinks about whether the irrigation channel that feeds water to his field will have enough water this year. It's been slightly lower than normal, though he's not sure if this is just a normal variation or a sign of something worse. He doesn't think about the light yet. It still hasn't occurred to him that anything is seriously wrong. Hassan, his neighbor, is working in his adjacent field. You could see him through the heat haze, a figure moving with the same rhythm, making the same repetitive motions. Marcus and Hassan don't speak much while they work. They save their conversation for the evening, when the heat is less intense. But there's a comfort in working near someone. There's a sense of shared experience. You're both doing the same hard thing. You're both betting that the crops will survive and sustain you through the coming year. Pause. In Constantinople, Lydia's work is entirely different, but it has its own rhythm and its own hypnotic quality. She's in the workshop where her husband's cloth is created. The work is done primarily by enslaved people and by hired workers, but Lydia oversees it. She understands the process intimately. She spent years learning how to judge the quality of the dye, how to ensure the cloth is being finished correctly, how to manage the workers so that output is maximized. The workshop smells of the Murex dye, a complex smell that's part urine, because that's part of the dyeing process, using urine as a mordant, and part something chemical that doesn't have a modern equivalent. It's a smell that Lydia has learned to love because it means money. The dye creates this incredible color, a purple that seems to contain all colors within it, that catches light in a way that feels almost supernatural. This purple is worth more than its weight in gold, or close enough that the difference is academic. The workers are moving through the process with trained efficiency. This is a process that's been refined over centuries. Each step requires specific knowledge. The cloth has to be prepared properly. The dye has to be applied at precisely the right temperature. The mordant has to be worked in so that the color bonds to the fiber permanently. Someone is singing as they work. The song is repetitive, a folk song that most people know. It's something that helps with the rhythm of labor, giving your body something to move to, something to organize the repetitive motions around. The song is in Greek, and it tells a story about a fisherman and a sea deity. It's been sung in this workshop for at least 5 years that Lydia knows of, possibly much longer. Pause. She moves through the workshop, checking the temperature of the dye with her fingers. She's learned to judge it by touch. She examines a piece of cloth that's almost finished, running her fingers across it to feel whether the dye has set properly. She speaks to workers about their progress. She's not harsh, but she's clear about expectations. The work must meet her standards. The purple dye is expensive. Cloth that's not properly dyed is cloth that's wasted. Waste means loss of income. This is Lydia's hoe, in a sense. This is her field. The work is different. It's more skilled, more refined, but it has the same quality of repetitive expertise. She knows these processes. They're in her hands. She could do them in her sleep, though she never has to because she has workers to do them. But she understands them so thoroughly that she can judge immediately whether something is being done correctly. Gregorius is in another part of the workshop, speaking with a merchant who's come to inquire about a special commission. The merchant wanted a large quantity of purple cloth, finally finished, prepared for delivery by a specific date. Gregorius is listening, and Lydia can see from across the room that he's already calculating whether this is possible, whether they have a supply of dye, whether they can coordinate the labor to complete it in time. This is a machinery of trade. This is how wealth is created and maintained. Someone wants something. You have the knowledge and the resources to provide it. You negotiate a price. You do the work. The money comes. This is the system that Constantinople is built on, and it's worked so well for so long that it seems as though it will always work. Pause. Brother Anselm is copying a manuscript. He's been copying the same manuscript for 3 months now, and he'll continue copying it for perhaps another month. The text is from Paul's letters to the Corinthians in Latin, written in a careful, formal script that requires complete concentration. The work is done in a scriptorium, a long room with windows positioned to catch the maximum amount of natural light. It's still reasonably early in the morning, so the light is good. In the afternoon, the light becomes more difficult to work in, and the brothers adjust their schedule accordingly. Brother Anselm has a quill in his hand. It's made from a goose feather, and it's worn at the tip in a way that's specific to his particular grip and his particular way of moving. The quill works suspiciously well, which makes him trust it deeply while understanding it not at all. He's learned not to question why certain quills work and others don't. He simply uses the quills that work and sets aside the ones that don't. The ink is made from iron gall and oak gall mixed with water. It's a recipe that's been used for centuries. It creates a black that's durable, that won't fade over time. Important texts that are meant to survive for centuries, require this kind of permanence. The rhythm of copying is look at the text, understand the word, form the letters on the page. Look at the text again, understand the next word. Form those letters. The process is meditative, yes, but it's also one of intense concentration. A single error can ruin an entire page. You can try to scrape the error away with a knife, but this is time-consuming and risks damaging the parchment. It's better not to make errors in the first place. Pause. Dip right, lift. Dip right, lift. The rhythm is so established that Brother Anselm could do it unconsciously, except that the work requires perfect consciousness. He must be aware of every letter. He must be aware of the slant of the script, the height of the letters, the space between words. The work demands absolute attention, while also existing in a state so practiced that it feels almost automatic. The other monks in the scriptorium are similarly engaged. Some are copying text. Others are illuminating, adding the decorative capital letters and illustrations that make the manuscripts beautiful. Some are simply preparing pages, cutting parchment to size and preparing it for use. The room is quiet except for the scratching of quills and the occasional sound of someone setting down a pen or a knife. Brother Anselm has copied enough text that he no longer needs to look up at the exemplar very frequently. He can remember the words. He knows them. His hands are simply transferring what his memory holds onto the page in front of him. Paul's advice to the Corinthians. Guidance about how to live as a Christian. Wisdom about faith and love and the resurrection. Words that have been considered important enough to be copied by hand, over and over, centuries after they were first written. It's meaningful work. That's what sustains him. Brother Anselm knows. If he were simply copying random text, copying things that meant nothing, the work would be so deadening. But he's copying scripture. He's preserving words that he believes are sacred. Every letter he puts on the page is, in some way, an act of devotion. Pause. And so the day progresses. Marcus continues to weed his field. The sun continues to move across the sky. By midday, the heat is intense. The sky is a bright blue. The sun is exactly where it should be, providing exactly the amount of light it should provide. The world is operating normally. Lydia manages her workshop. The cloth continues to be dyed. The quality remains high. Orders are being filled. Money is being made. The network of trade that stretches from Constantinople to the distant reaches of the Mediterranean continues to function. Brother Anselm continues to copy his manuscript. His fingers have begun to ache slightly from gripping the quill, but this is normal and expected. He'll finish copying for the day in a few hours when the light becomes too difficult to work in. Then he'll have time for prayer and contemplation before the evening meal. Everything is normal. This is still the world as it's understood itself to be. The world that's reliable and comprehensible and fundamentally stable. No one yet knows that this is the last day this will be true. Pause. The barley that Marcus is tending will become flour. It will become bread. It will become, in the months to come, the substance that keeps his family alive. It will be ground between stones. It will be mixed with water. It will be cooked over a fire. It will be broken into pieces and distributed among the people he loves. This is an abstract for Marcus. He understands viscerally what happens if this crop fails. He's seen it happen to other farmers. He's seen families become desperate. He's seen people sell land or animals or even their own children into slavery because the crop failed and they have nothing else to convert into food. It doesn't happen often, but it's always possible. It's always a risk. His work, then, is a form of insurance against catastrophe. Every hour he spends weeding his field is an hour spent preventing the catastrophe of starvation. Every careful attention to the health of the plants is a choice to survive. Hassan, in his adjacent field, is doing the same work for the same reason. They're neighbors, but they're also competitors. If Hassan's crop does well and Marcus's crop fails, Hassan's wealth will increase and Marcus's will decrease. There's a natural tension between them, though it's usually managed with civility and the understanding that this year it might be one of them, and next year it might be the other. By evening, Marcus will return to his house. His back will hurt. His hands will be blistered in new places, layered over blisters from the previous day. His shoulders will burn, but he will have made progress. He will have prevented a portion of potential future disaster. Pause. Lydia's work is creating items of stunning beauty and tremendous value. The purple cloth that emerges from her workshop is not a necessity for survival. No one needs purple cloth to live, but it's desired intensely by people who have money. It's a status symbol. It's a marker of wealth and importance. A Roman senator's wife wears purple cloth to signal her position in society. A wealthy merchant's daughter wears purple cloth to signal her father's success. In a real sense, Lydia is creating hope, the kind of hope that comes with visible status, the kind that comes with being able to say, "Look what I have. Look what my family has achieved. Look how far we've risen." There's a shipment being prepared right now, cloth that will be transported via merchant ship across the Mediterranean to a buyer in Rome. The shipment includes 6 bolts of especially fine purple cloth, dyed to a particular shade that Lydia has been working on perfecting for 2 years. This shade is unique. Other workshops don't have it. Its competitive advantage, converted into fiber and dye. The cloth will arrive in Rome. It will be purchased by a wealthy family. It will be made into garments. Those garments will be worn to important social events. They will signal wealth and good taste. They will make the wearer feel powerful and beautiful. And Lydia, working in her workshop in Constantinople, will receive payment for creating this chain of feeling and status. Her work matters, but it matters in a different way than Marcus's work matters. His work is about basic survival. Her work is about creating value and beauty and social positioning in a world where these things matter intensely to the people who can afford them. Pause. Brother Anselm's work is creating something that might last for centuries. The manuscript he's copying might be read by monks 500 years in the future. His words, or rather, Paul's words that he's carefully transcribing, might shape the spiritual understanding of people who haven't even been born yet. This is a form of immortality, in a way, not the immortality of fame. Brother Anselm has no expectation that he'll be remembered, but the immortality of influence. His hand to creating an object that will outlast him by centuries, possibly by millennia. The text he's copying might be read in a monastery that hasn't been built yet, in a language that hasn't been developed yet. It's humbling and slightly terrifying. The monastery lives and is sustained by a network of similar copying activities. The monastery produces books, and books are valuable. They sell copies to other monasteries, to wealthy lay people, to the church hierarchy. The income from book production sustains the monastery. It pays for the food that the monks eat. It pays for the maintenance of the buildings. It pays for the copying materials, the parchment, the ink, the quills. In another sense, Brother Anselm's work is community service. The texts he's copying are texts that help people understand how to live. They provide spiritual guidance. They preserve knowledge that might otherwise be lost. In a world where there's no printing press, where every book must be copied by hand, the work of monks is essential. It's how knowledge and wisdom are preserved. It's how the accumulated understanding of centuries gets passed forward to future generations. Pause. And so the work continues. Each person is creating something. Marcus is creating the possibility of survival. Lydia is creating beauty and value and status. Brother Anselm is creating knowledge and wisdom that will endure beyond his lifetime. These are different kinds of value, but they're all real. They all matter. They all represent the human effort to improve the world, or at least maintain it in a functioning state. By evening, when the work ends the day, each of them will experience a sense of satisfaction. Not joy exactly. These are people whose lives are too precarious to experience unmixed joy. But satisfaction. The satisfaction of having worked, of having contributed, of having done something that matters. They don't know yet that all of this work, all of this careful effort to build and maintain things, is about to become much harder. They don't know that the value they're creating is about to face pressures it's never faced before. They don't know that Marcus's barley might not grow, that Lydia's trade networks might collapse, that Brother Anselm's monastery might face starvation. Right now, they're just people doing their jobs, creating value, creating meaning, creating the small human rituals that make life feel like it's worth living. Pause. Marcus has not always been the person who can judge the exact right moment to weed, the exact depth to press the hoe into the soil, the exact rhythm of the work. He remembers being younger, learning from his father. He remembers his father's disappointment when he worked too quickly and uprooted barley plants along with the weeds. He remembers his father's patience, though the patience had an edge to it that suggested the older man sometimes questioned whether his son would ever understand the work. He was 14 when he first started doing this work on his own. Before that, he'd worked alongside his father, mimicking his movements, gradually learning the knowledge that's in the body more than in the mind. The first year, he did it alone. He made countless mistakes. He weeded too late, so the weeds had already consumed nutrients that should have gone to the barley. He weeded too aggressively, damaging the crop itself. He didn't maintain consistent depth with the hoe, so in some parts of the field the weeds survived, and in others the soil was overly disturbed. His father had walked the field and examined Marcus's work with an expression that was difficult to read. The older man didn't say much. He just pointed out specific problem areas. Here, you went too deep. You've broken the roots of the barley. Here, you stopped too early. These weeds will recover. The implied message was clear. You're doing this wrong. You need to do better. By the next year, Marcus had improved. It wasn't perfect, but it was much better. By the third year, it was his work now. He understood it. It was in his hands. His father would still occasionally walk the field, but he no longer needed to correct Marcus. The work was good. That was 30 years ago. Now Marcus's knowledge is so complete that he doesn't think about it anymore. He simply does the work. His body knows what to do. The knowledge has been so thoroughly integrated that it feels like instinct, though he knows it's not. It's learning so complete that it's become invisible. Pause. Lydia's path to mastery was different. She grew up in a merchant family, though not in trade itself. Her father was a jeweler. She learned from him how value is determined, how quality is assessed, how you negotiate with people who want something you have. When she married Gregorius, she entered the world of textile production through marriage. She had to learn an entirely new system of knowledge. She remembers her first year trying to judge the quality of dye. She would see cloth that she thought was properly dyed, and Gregorius would shake his head and explain why it wasn't. The color wasn't even. The tone was too muted. The durability wasn't what it should be. She had to develop an eye for these subtle gradations, and the development was gradual and frustrating. She remembers one failure in particular, a batch of cloth that she'd assured Gregorius was ready to ship. It turned out that the dye hadn't set properly. It would fade. It would crack. It was unusable. Gregorius hadn't gotten angry. He'd been disappointed, which was somehow worse. He'd said, "You have to learn to feel this, Lydia. The dye has a quality to it that you can sense with your fingers if you pay careful attention. I can't teach you this. You have to develop it yourself." It had taken her 2 more years before she'd reliably developed that sense. 2 years of constantly touching cloth, of paying absolute attention to the differences between cloth that was properly dyed and cloth that wasn't. 2 years of failures that were smaller than the first one, but still failures. By the time she had mastered it, she had learned something deeper than just how to judge dye. She'd learned persistence. She'd learned that mastery doesn't come quickly. She'd learned humility. Pause. Brother Anselm's apprenticeship happened in the monastery. He entered as a young man of 26, which was relatively late. Most monks entered as children, but he'd had a secular life first. He'd worked as a scribe in a small city, copying documents for merchants and the government. He had basic knowledge of Latin and handwriting, but he didn't have the spiritual dedication that monastic life requires. His first year in the monastery was brutal, not in the sense of physical hardship, The monks lived more comfortably than most of the secular population, but in the sense of spiritual difficulty. He had to reorient his entire understanding of what his life was for. He had to learn to pray. He had to learn to live in community. He had to learn the elaborate structure of monastic life, where every moment of every day was organized, where silence was expected, where individual was subordinated to the will of the community. He remembers the copying initially being the one thing that felt familiar. He already knew how to do it, but the monastic copying was different. The speed was different. It had to be perfect, which meant it was much slower than the secular work. The purpose was different. This wasn't copying documents for money. It was copying scripture for spiritual advancement. The context was different. This was work done in community, with specific rules about how the work should be conducted. He had a moment, about 3 months into his time at the monastery, when he wanted to leave. He was in the scriptorium, copying a psalm, and he suddenly felt trapped. The work seemed pointless. The prayers seemed pointless. The entire monastic life seemed like a massive mistake, and he wondered why he thought this was a good idea. He'd set down his quill and gone to find the abbot. He'd explained his doubts. The abbot had listened patiently, and then he'd said something that Brother Anselm has carried with him for 32 years. The abbot had said, "Brother Anselm, the feeling that this is all pointless is not the absence of purpose. It's the feeling of your old purpose dying and your new purpose not yet fully alive. If you wait in that space patiently, if you trust that the new purpose will grow, then in 6 months or a year, you won't remember what this doubt even felt like." He'd stayed, and the abbot had been correct. Over time, the work had become meaningful. Prayer had become meaningful. Community had become meaningful. The old purpose, making money through copying work, had faded away, replaced by something deeper. Pause. All three of them, Marcus, Lydia, and Brother Anselm, carry these memories of learning. They carry the memory of not knowing. They carry the memory of failure. And these memories give them a deep understanding of how their current skill was earned. They understand that their current abilities are not natural talents or divine gifts. They're the product of years of repeated practice, of failures learned from, of discipline applied over time. This understanding will matter in the coming year, because the year 536 will test their skills in ways they haven't been tested before. The knowledge they've accumulated through decades of practice will be insufficient. The failures they've learned from in the past will be different from the failures they're about to face. But the deeper knowledge, the knowledge that learning is possible, that adaptation is possible, that humans can change when circumstances demand it, will sustain them. They don't know this yet. Right now, they're just people who work for years to become good at what they do. But the knowledge of how they became good at what they do is going to be essential to their survival in the months to come. Pause. By the time the sun begins to set on the days of early summer in 536, Marcus's body is screaming. His back aches in a way that has become permanent. The ache is worse on some days than others, but it never fully goes away. His joints are sore. His hands are blistered and calloused and permanently stained. There's a pain in his left hip that started 3 years ago and has never fully resolved. When the weather changes, he can feel it. When he works too hard, he can feel it. He's not old, Marcus. He's 45, but his body is the body of someone who spent his entire adult life in hard physical labor under the sun. The sun has aged his face. The work has worn down his joints. The constant physical strain has created chronic pain that's simply part of his existence now. He remembers being 25 and not understanding how his father could move so slowly, how the older man seemed to ache from every motion. Marcus had thought, when I'm older, I won't let this happen to me. I'll stay stronger. I'll work differently. But he discovered that time doesn't care about your intentions. Your body ages. The work wears it down. This is simply what happens if you're a farmer. Pause. He walks home from a field, and each step is a small negotiation with pain. The weight of his body pressing down on knees and hips and ankles that protest with every motion. By the time he reaches his house, he's in a state of physical exhaustion that's so complete it feels like it extends into his soul. His muscles don't just ache. They feel hollow, as though they've given everything they have to give and there's nothing left. Sophia has prepared a meal. There's soup made from vegetables and a small amount of meat, Probably some kind of small animal that she or one of the children caught or raised. There's bread. There's watered wine. It's not much, but it's enough. It's the kind of meal that people in Marcus's position eat regularly. Not sparse enough to be called deprivation, but sparse enough that you're always aware of the possibility of deprivation if anything goes wrong. He eats. The food helps. His body absorbs the energy, and some of the worst of the exhaustion fades. But the ache in his muscles remains. It will remain until he sleeps, and it will probably return tomorrow, because tomorrow will bring the same work. He lies down to sleep earlier than he usually does. The pain is pushing him toward rest. His body simply cannot do anything but sleep. He lies on a straw mat, and almost immediately he begins to drift away. His last conscious thought is a kind of prayer, though he doesn't think of it that way. It's just a thought. Please let the crop continue to grow. Please let the work of today matter. Pause. Lydia's physical toll is different, but it's real. By the end of the day, her eyes ache from observing details in cloth. The color-matching work is visually demanding. Judging the consistency of the dye requires intense focus on fine gradations of color and tone. Her eyes have become tired from this work. The light in the workshop isn't ideal, and while it's better than natural light at certain times, it's still a strain. She also carries a lower-level physical tension that comes from being in a position of responsibility. She's not doing the physical work, but she's coordinating it. She's making decisions. She's managing people. This creates a different kind of physical strain, a tightness in her shoulders and neck, a kind of held tension that comes from carrying responsibility for the success or failure of an enterprise. She remembers being younger and not understanding why her mother seemed to hold her shoulders so tightly, seemed to carry so much tension in her face. She'd thought, when I'm a woman managing a household or a business, I'll be more relaxed. I'll find a way to let go of the stress. But she's discovered that this is harder than she expected. The responsibility doesn't go away just because you want it to. Your body holds it regardless. Pause. She also carries the exhaustion that comes with managing slaves. It's not a form of exhaustion that you read about in stories, but it's real. Managing people who are enslaved, who have no choice but to work for you, who have no power and no rights. It creates a psychological strain. It makes her uncomfortable in ways she doesn't always acknowledge. She was born into a society where slavery is simply part of the structure, and she's never questioned it. But there's still something about it that sits uneasily in her chest. She eats dinner with Gregorius. They discuss the merchant who came by. He wants a cloth in 2 months. It's tight on timing. They'll need to increase production. They'll need to purchase more dye. There's a risk here. If something goes wrong, if the dye doesn't arrive on time, if any step of the process is delayed, they'll miss the deadline and lose not just the income, but their reputation for reliability. Gregorius says, we can do it, but he says in a way that suggests he's not entirely sure. Lydia hears the uncertainty, and it increases her own anxiety. She lies in bed next to him, and she finds herself thinking about all the things that could go wrong. The dye could be contaminated. Workers could get sick. A ship could be delayed or lost. Any number of things could derail the project. She falls asleep thinking about potential disasters, and her sleep is less restful as a result. Her body doesn't fully relax. She remains slightly tensed, as though ready to wake up and manage whatever crisis might arrive. Pause. Brother Anselm's physical toll comes from a different source, though it's also real. His back aches from sitting for hours in the scriptorium. His neck is stiff from looking down at pages constantly. His hands ache from gripping the quill. The repetitive motion of copying creates a kind of cumulative strain that builds throughout the day and throughout the years. He's 58 years old, and he's been copying for 32 years. That's a lot of repetitive strain. His hands are gnarled now, slightly twisted. They hurt most days. Some days, the pain is bad enough that he has to stop copying earlier than he otherwise would. There's also the physical toll of the monastic life itself. The food is adequate but not abundant. The cells are cold. The physical discipline that's part of monastic culture, sleeping on a simple mat, wearing rough cloth, enduring cold and hunger, wears on the body over time. Brother Anselm is strong for his age, stronger than most secular people his age, but he's still aware of the physical limitations that come with advancing years. He also carries exhaustion that comes from spiritual struggle. Monastic life is theoretically a life of peace and contemplation, but it's also often a life of interior difficulty. Doubt comes, questions come. The faith that seems so clear when you first enter the monastery becomes complicated and nuanced over time. Brother Anselm carries this interior struggle, and it creates a kind of fatigue that's different from physical fatigue, but just as real. Pause. He finishes his copying for the day. He's reached a natural stopping point in the text, and he sets down his quill. He rises from his seat, and his back creates that same cracking sound that Marcus experienced this morning. It's a sound of joint settling, of age claiming the body. He rolls his shoulders and feels the stiffness in them, the strain from hours of sitting in a specific posture. He goes to the evening prayer with the other monks. He stands with them and sings, and his voice isn't as strong as it was years ago, but it's still capable. He listens to the abbot read from Scripture. He returns to his cell and performs his evening devotions. He lies down on his mat, and he thinks about the text he's been copying. Paul talking about suffering, about endurance, about the transformation that comes through hardship. He wonders if Paul experienced physical pain, if the apostle's body ached the way his does. He wonders if the spiritual knowledge Paul gained was worth the physical toll of the life Paul lived. He falls asleep wondering these things, and his sleep is deep and dreamless. The sleep of someone whose body is too exhausted to dream, too exhausted for anything except rest. Pause. All three of them, Marcus, Lydia, and Brother Anselm, carry their physical tolls without complaint, or rather, they complain very little. This is simply what life is. Your body hurts. You work anyway. You eat. You sleep. You wake up and work again. This is a rhythm of life in 536. They don't know yet that the toll is about to increase, that the work is about to become harder, that the exhaustion they're managing now is going to transform into a different kind of exhaustion. They only know that they're tired, and that rest will help, and that tomorrow will bring more work. This is a reality of human life at all times and in all places. We carry our bodies with all their limitations and their pain, and we continue. We don't have a choice. We simply continue. Pause. In Marcus's village, he occupies a specific position. He's not wealthy, but he's not destitute either. He owns his own land, which makes him more stable than the many people who work as tenant farmers or agricultural laborers. This status gives him a certain respect in the community. When there are community decisions to be made, Marcus is consulted. When there's work that needs to be done collectively, Marcus is expected to participate. He's also known as a competent farmer. People respect his knowledge. When younger farmers have questions about crop management or dealing with specific problems in the fields, they come to Marcus. He's the medieval equivalent of a master of his craft, someone whose knowledge is recognized and valued. Hassan, his neighbor, is his friend and his competitor. They work adjacent fields. They share irrigation water from the same source, which creates both cooperation and potential conflict. In good years, there's plenty of water for both of them. In dry years, the question of fair allocation becomes more complex. They've managed this so far through a combination of negotiation and customary practice. They understand the rhythm of water allocation. It's a system that's worked for their fathers and their grandfathers. Marcus is also known as a man who keeps his word. In a society without written contracts and without legal enforcement systems that work particularly well, reputation is everything. If Marcus says he'll do something, he does it. If he makes an agreement, he honors it. This reputation is valuable. It means that other people trust him. It means that if he ever needs help, people will come. Pause. Walking through the village in the late afternoon, Marcus greets people. There's the blacksmith, a man named Victor. There's the miller, whose name is Constantius. There's the baker, a woman named Julia. These are the essential people of the community, people whose skills are necessary for everyone. The blacksmith makes tools. The miller grinds grain. The baker bakes bread. Marcus's relationship to these people is one of practical interdependence. He needs their services. They need the product of his farm or the labor that his status allows him to contribute to community projects. There's a kind of trading relationship, though it's not always explicit. It's more like an understanding that everyone contributes what they can, and everyone receives what they need. There's also the landowner, the person who technically owns the land that Marcus works. This person is absent most of the time, living in the city. Marcus pays rent to this person in the form of a portion of the crops. The landowner rarely visits. The relationship is distant and bureaucratic, mediated through an overseer who collects the rent and ensures that the landowner's interests are protected. Marcus sometimes resents paying rent on land that he's worked his entire life, land that feels like it should be his. But this resentment is theoretical rather than actual. This is the system. People who own land collect rent from people who work the land. It's how society is organized. Everyone understands this, more or less. Pause. Lydia's position in Constantinople is entirely different. She's part of the merchant class, which is a privileged position in the city. The merchant class controls trade, which controls wealth, which controls power. She's not as powerful as the aristocrats or the government officials, but she's infinitely more powerful than the farmers and the laborers and the slaves who make up the vast majority of the population. She moves in circles of other wealthy merchants. She knows other women whose husbands are in trade. They visit each other's homes. They share information about trade routes, about which merchants are reliable, about what prices people are paying for goods. These networks are how commerce flows. They're how business gets done. She also has a degree of freedom that most women don't have. Her husband respects her knowledge. He trusts her to make decisions about the workshop. This is not common. Many women have little to no say in their husband's business, but Lydia is different. Gregorius recognizes her competence. He values her input. She also carries certain responsibilities that come with her position. She's expected to maintain a household that displays their wealth appropriately. She's expected to be generous to people of lower status when it's suitable to be generous. She's expected to serve as a representative of her family in social situations. These expectations are a kind of invisible labor that's never acknowledged or compensated, but they're part of her role. Pause. She also, like all women of her time, carries a kind of underlying vulnerability. If something happened to Gregorius, her entire position would be threatened. Her status depends on being married to a man of status. If she became a widow, her options would be limited. She could potentially remarry, but she couldn't simply continue to exist as an independent person. She would need a man, a father, a brother, a son, to define her position in society. She doesn't dwell on this often. She has security now. Gregorius is healthy. She has children. But somewhere beneath the surface, she's aware of this dependence. She's aware that her power, while real, is not entirely her own. Pause. Brother Anselm's position in the monastery is one of respect and recognition. He's been copying manuscripts for 32 years. He's excellent at his work. The abbot consults him about matters related to the scriptorium. Younger monks come to him for advice about how to hold a quill, how to maintain focus, how to develop the discipline that the work requires. He occupies a role that's valued in the community. Copying is essential work. The books that the monastery produces generate income. The books preserve knowledge. This is recognized as important, even if it's not always acknowledged with specific honor. He's also part of a community that functions, more or less, as a family. The monks are brothers in a literal sense. They call each other brother, and they live according to rules that emphasize community and equality. It's an idealized family, of course. There are still hierarchies. The abbot has authority. Some monks have more privilege than others. But compared to secular society, where hierarchy is extreme and violent, the monastery is relatively egalitarian. He also carries a position of relative privilege. He's not enslaved. He's not poor. He has food, shelter, and meaning. In a world where most people are struggling with basic survival, he's comfortable. He's aware of this privilege, sometimes with guilt. The monastic vow of poverty is supposed to mean that he doesn't value material comfort, but he's learned that humans are complicated. He can both value simplicity and appreciate comfort. He can both believe in a vow and acknowledge that he's living a relatively privileged life. Pause. These three people, Marcus, Lydia, and Brother Anselm, are woven into the fabric of their communities in different ways. They're recognized, they're valued, they understand their place in the social structure, and they mostly accept that place as natural and inevitable. This understanding of their social role gives them meaning. It gives them identity. It makes them feel like they're part of something larger than themselves. In the year 536, when the crisis comes, these social roles will be tested. The community's structures will be stressed. The hierarchies will be questioned. The relationships that seem stable and natural will become fragile. But for now, in the early months of the year, they're still intact. They're still organizing people's lives. They're still providing meaning and security. Pause. The sun is setting on the early days of 536. In just a few months, something will change. The sky will darken. The temperature will drop. The crops will fail. The careful structures that people have built, their communities, their livelihoods, their assumptions about how the world works, will begin to crack. But that's not here yet. That's not now. Right now, as the sun dips below the horizon, Marcus is sitting outside his house with his wife. They're not speaking. They're just sitting, watching the light change from the bright gold of afternoon to the softer orange of evening to the deep purple of twilight. The air is cooling. The temperature is dropping the way it does every evening, the way it always has, the way it always will. Or so they assume. His body is settling into the cool of the evening. The worst of the pain that dogged him through the day is easing. The work is done. There's nothing more to do. The crops are growing or they're not growing. And at this point in the day, nothing Marcus can do will change that outcome. He's done his part. The rest is in the hands of the weather and the soil and the unknowable forces that govern growth. Hassan walks by on his way home, and he nods to Marcus. They don't speak. There's no need. They understand each other through simple acknowledgement. The day's work is done. The evening is coming. Tomorrow will bring more of the same. Pause. Lydia is in her bedroom, preparing for sleep. The evening meal has been cleared. The workshop has been closed down. The slaves are settling into their sleeping areas. The house is beginning to quiet. She removes her fine clothing and puts on a sleeping garment made of softer linen. Her body feels lighter without the weight of her daytime clothes. She can feel the temperature change as she moves through the house. The cooler stone of the bedroom compared to the warmer areas where fires were kept during the day. Gregorius is already lying in bed. He's tired from the day. She can tell by the way he's positioned his body, with the care of someone whose muscles are protesting. She lies down beside him, and he reaches over and touches her hair in a gesture that's both affectionate and sleepy. The merchant will pay well, he says quietly. He will, she agrees, and we can do the work. We can, she agrees again. This is reassurance. This is two people who have spent decades together confirming to each other that the future is manageable, that the challenges ahead can be overcome, that they can continue as they have been continuing. They're wrong, but they don't know that yet. Pause. Brother Anselm is in the monastery chapel for the final prayer of the day. The light has almost completely faded. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. The monks are singing the evening prayer. The words are in Latin, the same Latin that Brother Anselm copied earlier today. The words that Paul wrote so long ago about suffering and endurance. The singing is beautiful. The voices of trained monks, carrying harmonies that have been refined over centuries. The sound fills the chapel and seems to transform it into a space that's not quite of this world. For a moment, as he sings, Brother Anselm can feel the presence of something transcendent, something beyond the ordinary concerns of eating and working and sleeping. This is what sustains him. This is what makes the pain and the exhaustion and the uncertainty bearable. There's something about devotion that transforms suffering into meaning. There's something about community that transforms isolation into belonging. The prayer ends. The monks file out of the chapel. Brother Anselm walks to his cell. The air is cool. It's clear tonight. You can see stars. The stars are unchanging, eternal. They've been there for thousands of years. They'll be there for thousands of years more. This thought is comforting. Amid all the uncertainty and all the change that characterizes human life, The stars remain constant, reliable. He lies down on his straw mat. The cold of the mountain air is seeping into the stone, but he's used to this. He pulls his thin blanket over himself and settles in for sleep. Pause. The world is turning to night. The day is ending. In farms and villages and cities across the Mediterranean and beyond, people are settling into sleep. The work is done. The bodies are tired. The world is ready to rest. Tomorrow will bring more work, more struggle, more the daily effort that it takes to survive. But tomorrow is not here yet. Right now, there's just a darkness and the promise of sleep. The crops in Marcus's field are still growing. He doesn't know yet that they won't grow for much longer. The supply ship carrying dye to Lydia's workshop is still sailing. He doesn't know yet that it won't arrive. The monastery is still standing solid and protected. Brother Anselm doesn't know yet that the walls won't save him from what's coming. They're all still in the world before the catastrophe. They're still believing in a future that looks like the past. They're still trusting that tomorrow will operate according to the rules they've learned. Pause. But even in this moment of peace and rest, there's something in the air, something shifting, something preparing to change. If you were to look at the sky right now, truly look, with the kind of attention that most people don't give the sky, you might notice that the stars aren't quite as bright as they should be. There might be something slightly off about the transparency of the air, but it's so subtle that almost no one would notice. The change is coming, but it's coming slowly. It's coming in ways that won't be obvious until it's already happened. The year 536 is just beginning. The worst year in human history is unfolding. Somewhere, a volcano is erupting. Dust and ash are being thrown into the atmosphere. The planet is beginning its slow turn toward catastrophe. The climate is beginning to shift. The food production is beginning to fail. The world that these people know is beginning to end. But they don't know that yet. They can't know that yet. Right now, they're just resting. They're just sleeping. They're just preparing their bodies for another day of work. And so, like the farmer after a long day, like the merchant after making careful plans, like the monk after singing the evening prayer, you too can rest now, knowing that history continues its gentle rhythm, that humans have survived moments that seemed unsurvivable, that somewhere in the darkness, people are learning to endure, that tomorrow will come and you will face it, and you will continue. Sleep well. The night is long. The darkness is deep. The world continues turning. Rest now, and know that even in the worst years, there is rest. There is sleep. There is the possibility of continuing. Like and subscribe our channel, and also comment. Sleep.